I'm Dennis Embry, and I'm a prevention scientist, and you're probably wondering, what in the heck is that? And I dress like a rock star. So I make music in people's brains and behavior at a whole population level. What I'm interested in is how to create wellness and well-being, peace, productivity, health, and happiness in whole cultures. I am a licensed psychologist, and I can do it at an individual level, but that's not what interests me. I want all of the children in Yukon, in Canada, in the US, and across the world to have the best lives they can. When ancient peoples and anthropological peoples meet, the two chiefs, they typically ask the question, how are the children? Now, they're not asking, how are your specific children? They're asking, how are the people's children? Well, not well. So they're really wanting to know, how are the people? Because as it turns out in anthropological society, the well-being and the survival of the culture always depends on how well the children are. And I'd like to explore with you, through some of the themes that have already been presented today and will be presented, how we might make Yukon one of the shining stars of well-being for all of our children. Okay? First off, I'd like you to think about your own children or your grandchildren or your children of choice. Children of choice are the strays that you pick up on the street. Does anybody here have children of choice besides me? I am actually one of those kids. Now, I'd like you to think about those children, your children, grandchildren, children of choice, and think about what you'd like to have them pack in their suitcase of life as they go out of your house, hopefully at 18, and don't return at 25 to live on your couch. So what is it that you would like them to carry in their suitcase of life? Now, normally I'd stretch this out, but I only have 18 minutes, so I want to hear at least a few pops of what you want in the suitcase of life. Self-confidence. What else? Pardon? Work ethic. Sense of humor. Passion. Open mind. Integrity. Great. Okay, let's see if this works. There we go. So, these are the kinds of things that people list all over the country, all over this country, all over the US, and in foreign countries when I go. And these are just a few of the things. These are deeply, innately coded desires in humans as the most pro-social species on the planet. We cooperate across all of the people that constitute our tribe. And our tribes are getting larger and larger. But if we don't cooperate, we are predators of one another. Now, I'd like you to think about something different, which is, what else do you want for your kids? What do you want for your kids' friends of friends and their friends? Same thing. Why? Because if they don't have it, the chances are your child will catch the contagion that is affecting the other children. So this is about whose children? Our children, everyone's children. So, now think about, this thing has been, oh, that's the wrong one. Okay, so now think about the heavy loads that people could take in their life. A load of bricks in that suitcase or stones. What are the heavy things that you don't want the children to carry in their suitcases of life? Prejudice. Death. Addictions. Fear. Intolerance. Shame. Great. Those are the kinds of things all across the world, the same things nobody wants them to have in the suitcase of life for their children, and that should be changing. We had a little trouble with this yesterday. Well, it went through, I think. So, now, let's ask, what can we do to protect the futures of our children? What is it that we could do to make sure that their suitcases are lightly and well packed for life? And what could we do to keep the bricks out of them? But first, I need to take you on a tour of what is happening in North America. Now, there we go. So, this is the National Comorbidity Study. The National Comorbidity Study measures the rates of depression in each succeeding generation. Now, this is not the result of overdiagnosis. My colleagues at the National Institutes of Health are smarter than that. But what this shows is that for each succeeding generation, I'm born in 1948, right there at 46 to 1955. I'm 64 this year, past year. And what you'll see is each one of those gradings, as a younger generation come on board, they're having an earlier depression, and a larger percentage of people are having a depression. Now, let's think about what happens for the current generation. Draw the line in your mind. Now, for every young person who has a depression before age 18, they will lose the potential ability, they'll lose $300,000 in lifetime income. That's not a good thing. Plus the fact they're more likely to die from any number of diseases and disorders. Now, I'd like you to see the National Longitudinal Study in the United States. We've been following kids since the 1970s throughout their lives in panels. So by age 18, 25% of our young people in the United States will have an 35% will have an anxiety disorder by age 18. Now, you might think that's not such a big deal. Does anybody here own a small business besides me? Or an agency? Okay, so, you get an announcement today that you could apply for a contract or a grant or something, but you've got to get in the letter of intent by 5 o'clock today, and you give it to a young person who has an anxiety disorder. How's that going to work for you? Not well. And these are the young people who are likely to be abusing prescription drugs or engaging in heavy marijuana use. Now, 20% will have a behavioral disorder. These are the young people who are filling our jails in Canada and in America. 17% will have a mood disorder, and 25% will have a full-blown addiction by age 20. 25% will have a full-blown addiction by age 18. Altogether, 1 out of 2 of our kids in the U.S. will have one or more of these things by age 18. It's not as bad yet in Canada, but when we catch a cold, Canada can get the flu. So, notice that it starts earlier. This shows that further. This is the Great Smoky Mountain study showing the cumulative rate and prevalence of psychiatric disorders among young people in the Great Smoky Mountains longitudinal study. 500 kids every 2 years. Now notice what happens. The next younger cohort, they're getting sicker faster. Now the next youngest cohort, they're getting sicker faster every 2 years. Has anybody noticed this besides me? And so what do we need to do? To pay attention to the early onset. By the way, the risk factors that Brendan talked about are genetically encoded in frontier conditions. There are 2 genes that are selected among Caucasian people, dopamine 2 allele 1 and dopamine 4 allele 7, that are related to sensation seeking, novelty seeking. Dopamine 4 allele 7 confers a 15-point IQ advantage, and both of these are highly associated with human migration. To go over to the next hill, you have to be smarter, you have to have some sensation seeking and risk taking. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be standing here in the Yukon. And certainly the First Nations people wouldn't have come across all of that ice. So, how many of you know a middle class or working class or maybe an upper class family that's reasonably intact with a child, a teenager or an adult child with a mental or emotional or behavioral disorder besides me? Okay? If you ask people to hold up their hands in North America, typically almost everyone will. But if you ask people in some of the other Commonwealth countries, only 1/2 of the people will show their hands. If you ask them from the northern Scandinavian countries, in Europe, or the lowland countries, in Europe, Belgium, the Netherlands, only 1/4 of the people will raise their hands. Why? It's not because they're in denial, it's because they are actually using the prevention science at a population level to protect the futures of their children. Now, Canadians are more likely to be using some of this science. In fact, we have the largest use of some of our scientific findings in Manitoba than in the United States. So, all right, I call this euthanasia. It's not necessarily true that all of our kids are dying younger, but they're becoming more and more disabled and less able, less well. What can we do to change that? So, humans are the only intergenerational species where they transfer wealth and knowledge back and forth between the young generation and the old generation and the old generation back to the young generation. So if an older person is ill, we stay with them until they die, for example. No other species does that. Elephants will stick around for a while, but after a while they go, we got to go have lunch. But we stay to the end, and we invest in itty-bitty babies. Now that's breaking down because of all of this. And it affects multiple generations. It actually changes the expression of the genes through a process called epigenetic mechanisms. And because what's the principal predator of humans since the invention of stone tools? Other humans. And the principal source of safety for said humans? Other humans. So all of this is about friend or foe. So in the 1950s, we had a polio epidemic. I was growing up, and I was about 8 when I got my polio vaccine at Osborne Elementary School in Phoenix, Arizona. Who got the polio vaccines? Which kids? Everybody. We didn't ration it. We gave it to every kid. Why? Because every kid was at risk. Every kid in Yukon, in Canada, and in the United States is at risk for mental, emotional, and behavioral disorders that will have a lifetime adverse effect. And if they're not directly at risk, their friends are at risk, and they could be riding in a car or some other kind of risk factor. So we need behavioral vaccines like seat belts or brushing your teeth that you do daily to protect oneself from that. And good news, there are such behavioral vaccines. These are repeated actions, and they are protective. Here we go. So prediction makes protection and prevention possible. When the Weather Channel put on this video, what did the people do in New York and New Jersey and Connecticut? Batten down. Put sandbags out. Now, we didn't know which house might be destroyed or who might get killed, but we could say, bad stuff is going to happen. Take precautions. So we have similar things for Sandy Hook. So these are the basic early predictors. So low rates of psychological flexibility, high exposure to problematic behaviors, high exposure to toxic influences, and low reinforcement of pro-social behavior create those storms. But there are anecdotes to these things, behavioral vaccines, that embody these positive principles. This is from our article in the American Psychologist this past, I think it's in March. Now, watch this video.
Cherish them. I couldn't kill you. I would.
Protect them.
Jimmy, stop it!
And wipe away their tears.
I feel like I haven't got a minute. No one will happen because they're naughty.
Follow 5 families on an emotional 2-month journey to a happier home life.
They don't realise it yet, but they're the ones who are going to have to change.
Driving Mum and Dad Mad, a brand new series tonight at 9.
That was broadcast on ITV against Desperate Housewives in the United Kingdom. And it was an 8-week television show showing parents explicitly how to help handling difficult situations at home. The heroes were not like Nanny 911. The heroes were the parents. And they learned how to do these things. That show has been shown to, empirically, to have reached more people, as I said, than watching Desperate Housewives. We were actually able to experimentally test the effects of it. And if we had tried to do the same thing by having people go see a practitioner in parenting supports, we would have to have trained almost 11,000 practitioners in the United Kingdom. Now, that basic study has been replicated 3 times. We've also done a population-level study in the United States. And by the way, that TV show only cost $200,000 to produce. So you get an idea of cost-effectiveness, okay? So when these kinds of things are done, universal access to parenting supports in our population-level study in the U.S., we were able to reduce official records of child maltreatment by 25% in 2 years for the cost of $15 per child. Maybe we should do that.
And parents of young children will find this next story interesting. It's about a game some Winnipeg students are playing in class. Their teachers say it dramatically reduces disruptive behavior. The National's Nella Ayed got an inside look at the pilot project.
A harmonica isn't known as a tool for keeping discipline, but in this classroom, that's all it takes to bring peace and quiet.
We're going to play the PAX game.
So much about the so-called PAX good behavior game seems to defy logic. It's surprisingly simple. Teams can be challenged to finish tasks on a timer or complete an assignment. And if one of them misbehaves, it reflects on the whole team.
Good job.
A mix of competition and positive reinforcement.
Great job. 0 spleens.
It's supposed to teach self-control. Since they've started playing it in September, their teachers say the change is extraordinary.
They're just so calm, relaxed, happy. They know what's happening. They know what the expectations are.
Now, that particular study is reaching 9,000 kids, and in the other studies, these are the kinds of things it reduces. These are exactly the kind of behaviors that Brendan was talking about earlier that can be powerful or they can be risk-taking. But just teaching these children essentially mindfulness and self-regulation in 1 year has lifetime effects that go at least until the 21st year, and now we're following them to the 30th year of life. Imagine that we did that. Oh, by the way, it costs less than any medical vaccine we give for children. Now, this is a very quickly, I have to go through this. This is a case study in ancient wisdom. The Inuit used to eat a lot of fish, and many of them still do. Well, that confers. The Inukshuk points to the right thing for people. What that shows, for example, is when you use omega-3 fatty acid in clinical doses, it was the first study ever published to prevent first episode psychosis. That was important to us in Tucson. It didn't, nobody gave Jared Loeffner omega-3 fatty acid. The same kind of thing given to children in classrooms improves their spelling and writing abilities and reading versus placebo. There's the writing before, writing after. And I got to finish up. If you provide omega-3 fatty acid and vitamin D to people in the North Country, you have the potential to reduce schizoaffective disorder by 20% in their lifetime. That's not on TV. And what are the costs if we don't do anything? Well, if we did that little game they're doing in Manitoba, in the entire U.S., for every first grader, we could, if you don't do it, we're going to lose $18 billion. We'd lose $2 billion in Canada and $2 million here in the Yukon. Now, what are the steps necessary to do some of these things? Adopt some particular legislation like the Healthy Child Manitoba that makes these kinds of things possible. Set these things up as common pool resources. Our children are our future, and they need to be managed as common pool resources like Eleanor Ostrom talked about. We also need to create and select various behavioral vaccines to do all of this thing, and we need to create incentives, business incentives, to pay for success for our children's well-being. People are paid today for the illness behaviors. rather than for the success. And there's a mechanism of doing this. We need a scoreboard. Just like you get a dopamine hit when you're playing a computer game, and we learned that in 1999, you get a hit when you play a handheld device. And the computer people know that we get a hit on the scoreboard at our sports teams, our hockey teams. But you can use the same principle to show change at a population level. We did this in Wisconsin and Wyoming, and we were able to reduce youth tobacco enormously in 2 years' time using that scoreboard things. The future, ladies and gentlemen, for our children is in our hands. Tamariki Wairua is Maori. It means children are the gift of the gods held in common. Tamariki Wairua Fataputi Nake, Naterengi. Kia ora. Thank you very much.